Okay, what the fuck?
It's 1983, the Cold War is still raging, and a little-known 30-year-old financier named Jeffrey Epstein has somehow managed to embed himself inside the largest arms deal in British history.
The biggest arms contract that Britain ever signed.
The intermediaries were demanding payments to be made into Swiss bank accounts, they were demanding flats, they were demanding girls.
Today, I'm going to show you the evidence that Epstein ran illegal arms deals and became an intelligence asset while committing some of history's most horrific sex crimes. Because in the early 1980s, Epstein is working for a man named Douglas Leese, who's a wealthy, well-connected British defense contractor and arms dealer. At the time, the British government is in the middle of negotiating with Saudi Arabia the sale of nearly 100 of their advanced Tornado fighter jets, along with thousands of laser-guided missiles and precision bombs. A lot is at stake with the Al Yamama arms deal because it's set to create 100,000 jobs in the UK, totally reshape the Middle East balance of power, and earn the British defense company BAE Systems $80 billion in revenue. But there's a giant problem. In Saudi Arabia, deals were decided by royal family members and princes, so if you wanted a deal done, you paid these guys enormous bribes. One man's corruption was another man's way of doing business. And that is where Jeffrey Epstein came into the picture. This language and cultural barrier required a new type of global fixer. He allegedly worked with Douglas Leese as one of the key people who helped design the financial structures that hid the bribe money. Douglas Leese was one of the men who allegedly bribed the Saudi family and British officials. He was widely believed to be an intelligence asset for MI6. According to accounts from Leese's son Julian and from Epstein's former business partner Steven Hoffenberg, Leese mentored Epstein. This is where Epstein learned first how to create shell companies and smuggle weapons and move huge sums of money into offshore accounts. Later investigations by the United States and British government would reveal over $1 billion worth of off-the-books hidden commissions, bribes, and kickbacks, because Saudi Arabia had paid in a mix of oil shipments and cash. It all flowed through offshore accounts, intermediaries, and hidden financial structures that were designed to keep the real money trail invisible. Through Douglas Leese, Epstein was introduced to the highly profitable Cold War world of illegal arms deals and financial networks that concealed them. Supporting evidence for Epstein's alleged involvement in this arms deal comes from the FBI's 2019 raid of his New York City apartment. In it, they confiscated a fake Austrian passport from the 1980s that showed a younger Epstein under a totally different name. The entrance and exit stamps on the fake passport showed evidence that it was used in the early 1980s to travel between France, Spain, the United Kingdom, and Saudi Arabia. The most damning piece of evidence is that the times the passport was used to travel match with those that were used to facilitate the Al Yamama arms deal. Austria, especially Vienna, has been one of the world's biggest intelligence raid of his New York City apartment. In it, they confiscated a fake Austrian passport. Been one of the world's biggest intelligence hubs since the Cold War. But where did Epstein get a fake Austrian passport from in the 1980s? Intelligence analyst Thomas Hampson said, quote, "I can't imagine Epstein getting a fake passport or using one without official government backing and cover. Intelligence services made counterfeit passports. In those days, some organized crime groups could have managed that as well, but it's unlikely that they were involved." Evidence that his close associate Douglas Leese was connected to intelligence agencies comes from a filing in US courts years later that states, quote, "The nature and extent of Leese's activities and his various contacts around the world involve highly sensitive and confidential information, some of which are believed to be classified by the Department of Defense." Why would intelligence agencies create a passport for Epstein to help him with this arms deal? MI6 and CIA wanted the arms deal to go through because it would help contain Soviet influence. It would give Saudi Arabia air dominance against Iran, and it would help stabilize global oil markets, keeping Saudi Arabia tightly tied to Western bloc of influence, which was critical. The arms deal would lock Saudi Arabia into the Western security ecosystem for many decades to come. Epstein appeared to be one of Douglas Leese's fixers on the ground inside Saudi Arabia, helping facilitate this arms deal. Diplomatic cables leaked years later would show that Epstein's close associate, Prince Andrew, criticized the corruption investigation into the Al Yamama arms deal. Prince Andrew tried to get any audit of the deal shut down while he was the UK's special representative for international trade and investments. Epstein functioned like he was a useful tool through which Douglas Leese could add one more layer of plausible deniability to his allegedly illegal dealings. But that doesn't even scratch the surface, because Epstein's about to get involved in Iran-Contra and become an intelligence asset. We'll analyze this with today's sponsor, Ground News. Here we see there's new evidence that shows Epstein sent £10,000 to Ambassador Peter Mandelson's partner. The email suggests Lord Mandelson gave Epstein advance notice of an impending EU bailout, sent him internal government information about the state of the UK economy, and lobbied the Treasury on banking policy at Epstein's suggestion. Ground News allows me to see the quick facts. It shows me the bias of each source and rating of how factual it is, so I stick with resources that are only high in factuality. I use Ground News to research this episode because, especially when you're looking into corruption, scandals, and government officials, you need to be able to check where each media source gets their actual funding from. Some sources have in the past been revealed to be arms of intelligence agencies. We appreciate Ground News sponsoring the production work in this video. They're giving you 40% off the same Vantage plan that I use here. Just click the link in the description to go to ground.news/Cappy or scan the QR code to get a better understanding of how our shadowy world works.
Alright. I skip off of the ad.
Douglas Leese became Epstein's first major client at his consulting firm called International Assets Group. It was Leese who introduced Epstein to Adnan Khashoggi, the billionaire Turkish-born Saudi arms dealer who stood at the center of the Al Yamama deal. By 1987, Epstein had become Khashoggi's personal money manager, giving him direct access to one of the most powerful weapons brokers on the planet. A source who spoke with journalist Vicky Ward confirmed that Khashoggi was one of Epstein's clients, and this connection opened the door to a much darker world. Khashoggi was the prototype of the modern black market arms broker, a man who knew how to move weapons, money, and influence across borders without leaving any fingerprints. And by the 1980s, that underground system had grown into a parallel global economy. United Nations investigations and data from the Small Arms Survey show that illicit arms trafficking was generating up to $10 billion a year during the late Cold War. Proxy wars in Africa, Latin America, and the Middle East and Asia were fueled by this shadow network of dealers, financiers, and fixers operating beyond the reach of any single government. Weapons passed through shell companies in Panama and airlines that were fronts for intelligence agencies, all to hide and obfuscate their true origin. This complicated network required global power brokers and middlemen to handle and manage it. There was nothing new about profiting from war, but for the first time in history, it had to be done in a way that gave global governments complete plausible deniability. This meant using middlemen with loose morals and allegiances like Khashoggi, Leese, and Epstein. At the same time, Khashoggi was one of the main brokers behind the Iran-Contra arms deal. Arranged through back channels inside the US government, the operation shipped more than 2,000 TOW anti-tank missiles, around 500 Hawk surface-to-air missiles, and roughly 200 Sidewinder air-to-air missiles to Iran, all in violation of US law. The deal was worth about $140 million in today's money, and that cash was routed through foreign accounts and offshore networks, then redirected to fund the Contra rebels fighting in Nicaragua. And according to Stephen Hoffenberg, he alleged that Jeffrey Epstein was part of the financial side of this weapons dealing system. He allegedly helped Khashoggi move, structure, and hide his commissions from these arms deals using shell companies and overseas accounts.
The conspiracy.
Who is a former Israeli intelligence officer who stated that Epstein was selling US weapon systems from Israel directly to Iran as part of another covert arms deal that was separate from Iran-Contra. But global black market arms sales rose to over $20 billion annually by the 1990s. During the peak Cold War years, covert arms pipelines supplied conflicts in Afghanistan, Angola, Lebanon, Cambodia, and Iran simultaneously, and that's just scratching the surface. And the world's governments looked the other way because it was useful to them. Epstein's business partner Khashoggi was a principal foreign agent agent of the United States. He established the intelligence partnership between multiple nations known as the Safari Club. The Safari Club was a covert alliance of intelligence services from Iran, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Morocco, France, the United States, and Israel. It ran clandestine operations around Africa and the world during the 70s and early 80s. The Safari Club was one of the ways that the CIA supported arms deals and its proxy networks. Cartels, criminals, terrorists, and intelligence services used the same bank to launder their illicit funds for their operations, called the Bank Credit Commerce International. It was in this shadowy world of arms deals, fraud, and offshore accounts that Epstein allegedly became an expert and made himself indispensable. According to the New York Times, Jeffrey Epstein rented a penthouse office at the Hotel St. Martin's on Central Park South with John Stanley Pottenberg. Pottenberg was a lawyer who had recently left a senior post in the Justice Department in the United States. Under the CIA's direction, Pottenberg then advised a banker from Iran on how to ship embargoed arms to Iran using fraudulent paperwork. They used overseas dummy companies, basically. But this was at the same time when he was working with Jeffrey Epstein on the so-called tax avoidance strategies. We know from later disclosures that British intelligence MI6 and the American CIA were deeply involved in these arms deals. Israeli intelligence helped the Iran-Contra deal go through, according to US government internal investigation documents. What all this means is that during this time, Epstein showed himself to be a reliable asset who had no morals, which is what these ruthless intelligence agencies look for. According to testimony given by Stephen Hoffenberg, a former close associate and business partner, Jeffrey Epstein was also helping Douglas Lease with the sale of Chinese weapons to Iran through the Chinese Communist state-owned defense company Norinco. We know that during the 1980s, China supplied HY-2 Silkworm anti-ship cruise missiles to Iran and signed weapons agreements worth over $4.8 billion with Iran. If Epstein was making millions of dollars in commissions from these arms deals and hiding this money, it would go a long way in explaining where his fortune came from. It didn't seem like he had any value system, really. He didn't operate in the interest of any one country during this time. He facilitated these deals to enrich himself and to gain further power and to make himself untouchable. It was Jeffrey Epstein who created the financial network to enable these illicit arms deals to go through. This meant Epstein saw himself as outside the law, not accountable to anyone. And it was around this time in the mid-1980s that Epstein started bragging to people close to him that he worked for intelligence agencies and that he was untouchable. Intelligence officers are someone who are directly trained, employed, and work for
untouchable, he thought. Kakanmeister, thank you man, Valerio. Kebabagon, we got 8 years on NEC, thank you very much. What the fuck, 8 years already? That's crazy. For my 8th-year birthday, I wish for you to play Terraria very soon. I'm very sure it will come true if we believe hard enough. In the meantime, thank you very much for the 8 years.